Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Afina binti Azlan, matric number 271591. I'm from Group 7 to present the topic about institutionalist school. Historical background. The period is between Civil War and World War I. In this period, an achievement of American capitalism were impressed. The rapid growth made US the biggest and the most powerful industrial system in the world, and living conditions of which improved. However, the improvement in employees' standard of living does not last long because of some problems. First is about long hours of work, unemployment, inaccessibility of higher education, non-existence of job security, undermined wage rate, recession, and regressive taxation. Age of monopoly happened in late 19th century, where the economy started to question the concept of laissez-faire. Began in 1870s and accelerated around the turn of the century. State and federal governments, which proclaimed laissez-faire with respect to workers' interests, were quick to use the police and militia against labor in industrial disputes. Concern about monopoly, depression, poverty, and waste. The movement for social control and reform was gathering momentum, and it was in this milieu that institutional economics grew. Two methods of achieving social change is: one, reorganize society along socialist line, ameliorate conditions through government intervention in the economy. Two, undertake social reform. The objective of this approach was to save capitalism by improving the condition of the masses. Institutional economists in general were critical of social movements and favored a radical reconstruction of society. This is called reformist approach. The influence of the German historical school on American institutionalism. Most of the leaders of the American Economic Association in 1885 were familiar and friendly to a German movement and its methodology. First is John Bates Club, who is formulated a creed of Christian reform that had much in common with German reformist thinking. Second is George S. Morris, is one of the Hegelians trained in the German university. Third is Richard T. Ely, who studied under some of leading historical economists in Germany and became an ardent believer in the superiority of the inductive method over deductive method. However, despite certain similarities in methodology between the German historical school and American institutionalism, the latter was not nationalistic but more liberal and democratic in its outlook. Major tenets. First is holistic. The economy must be examined as a whole, a complex organism, cannot be understood if each segment is treated as if it were unrelated to larger entities, so it's contrast to microeconomics. So the economic activity is not merely the sum of activities of persons motivated individually and mechanically by the desire for maximum monetary gain. There are also patterns of collective action that are greater than the sum of the parts. For example, develops a character and ideology and a method of the operation of its own. Its features cannot be deducted from the study of individual members who belong to it. Even the concept of economic activity is too narrow in the institutionalist view. Economics, they assert in intertwined with politics, sociology, law, custom, ideology, tradition, and the other area of human belief and experience. Institutionalist economics deals with social process, social relationship, and society in all its facets. For the second major tenet is focus on institution. Emphasize the role of institutions in economic life. There are two different institutions, which is formal and informal. For the formal institution is organizations with particular objectives, such as school, a prison, a union, or Federal Reserve Bank, while informal institution is organization with pattern of group behavior, well established and accepted as fundamental part of the culture, such as customs, social habits, laws, modes of thinking, and ways of living. Economic decision is regulated by economic institution, not by the laws. Then, group social behavior and the thought patterns that influence it are more German to economic analysis than it's the individualism emphasized in marginalist theory. Next is evolutionary approach by Darwin. Evolutionary approach should be used in economics analysis because of society and its institutions are constantly changing. The institutionalists disagreed with the static viewpoint that sought to discover eternal economic truths without regard for difference in time and place, without concern for changes that were occurring constantly. The evolution and functioning of economic institutions should be the central themes in economics. This approach requires knowledge not only in economics but also history, cultural anthropology, political science, sociology, philosophy, and psychology. Next is rejection of the idea of normal equilibrium. Emphasize the principle of circular causation or cumulative changes that may be either salutary or harmful in seeking economic and social goals. Maladjustment in economic life are not departures from normal equilibrium, but rather they are themselves normal. This need to coordinate to reach the equilibrium back. The institutionalist thinks that government intervention is needed to make correcting, overcome deficiencies and maladjustment in economic life. So this contrasts to laissez-faire. Next is liberal democratic reform. Make reforms in order to bring about more equitable distribution of wealth and income. They deny that market prices are adequate indices of individual and social welfare. The institutionalists condemn laissez-faire and favored a larger role for government in economic and social affairs. Next is rejection of pleasure pain psychology. The institutionalists re-update the Benthamic underpinnings of economic analysis for a better psycho, and some of them incorporated Freudian and behaviorist idea into their thinking. Freud and personality structure contains ID, ego, and superego. ID is energy constantly striving to satisfy basic drives. This is called pleasure principle. Ego is seek to gratify the ID in realistic ways. This is called reality pleasure. Superego is voice of conscience that focuses on how ought to behave. The last one for the major tenets is clashes of interests. Instead of harmony of interest that most of their contemporaries and predecessors deduced that from their theories, the institutionalists recognize serious difference of interests. People are cooperative and collective creatures. They organize themselves into groups for the members' mutual self-interest, which becomes the common interest of the group. There are, however, clashes of interest between groups. So, the government must override clashing interests for the common good and for the efficient working of the economic system. Next is liberal democratic reform. Make reforms in order to bring about more equitable distribution of wealth and income. They deny that market prices are adequate indices of individual and social welfare. The institutionalists condemn laissez-faire and favored a larger role for government in economic and social affairs. Next is rejection of pleasure pain psychology. The institutionalists re-update the Benthamic underpinnings of economic analysis for a better psycho, and some of them incorporated Freudian and behaviorist ideas into their thinking. Freud and personality structure contains ID, ego, and superego. ID is energy constantly striving to satisfy basic drives. This is called pleasure principle. Ego is seek to gratify the ID in realistic ways. This is called reality pleasure. Superego is voice of conscience that focuses on how ought to behave. The last one for the major tenets is clashes of interests. Instead of harmony of interest that most of their contemporaries and predecessors deduce that from their theories, the institutionalists recognize serious difference of interests. People are cooperative and collective creatures. They organize themselves into groups for the members' mutual self-interest, which becomes the common interest of the group. There are, however, clashes of interest between groups. So, the government must override clashing interests for the common good and for the efficient working of the economic system.
Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. My name is Muhammad Shahirul Shafiq bin Muhammad Zainuddin. Metric number 211-863. Today, I will talk about who will benefit from the ideas of thinking of institutionalist school. Generally, this school embodied the middle class desire for reform in an era of big business and banker capitalism. It represented the needs and the interests of agrarian, small business, and labor groups. These institutionalist ideas gained attraction from the middle class group such as government workers, reformers, consumer organization leaders, humanitarians, and union members. This is because they hope this school of economic thought could alter or make the orientation of private business enterprise in favor of their own interests. Besides, many academicians who are not in the field of economics also adopt the institutionalist interdisciplinary focus and their advocacy of social changes. How was the institutionalist school valid, useful, or correct in its time? First and foremost, this school of economics taught more emphasis on inductive studies to reduce the gap between the economic theory and practice. The second point is they more concerned over business cycles and monopolies. Besides that, this school of economic thought encourage or promote a reform movement that will effectively remove the capitalist system. The last point is this school also looking at the economy as a whole as a part of evolutionary process, and they also added the elements of realism to economics analysis. Next discussion, which tenets of the institutionalist school became lasting contributions? First tenet is holistic broad perspective. It became a reality within the economy ideas with the appearance and widespread acceptance of Keynesian macroeconomics. The second tenet is the reform movements. The reform movements was the modest steps toward national economic planning for limited such as conservation and full employment are in line with the institutionalist thought. The legal protection of unionism, social insurance, minimum wage, and maximum hour legacy are all legacies of the institutionalist challenge to orthodox economic thinking. Lasting contribution of this school of economic thought that found in other fields were in labor relation, law and economics and industrial organization. The last tenets of the institutionalist school became lasting contribution is traditional institutional economics still exists within United States today. The membership of the Association for Evolutionary Economics, as known as AFEE, is largely composed of economists who are oriented toward institutionalist method and policy perspective. They had published the Journal of Economic Issues. However, the overall penetration of institutionalists into the mainstream of economy or ideas of economics remains modest.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Sadatu Najwa and my matric number is 270056. I represent my part. They are Tosti Bande Veblen, one of the economists of institutional school. Veblen, the son of Norwegian immigrant, was born on July 1857 in Wisconsin. He completed his graduate from Carleton College in Northfield, where he was a student of J.B. Clark. He is also known as American economist and social scientist. He received his PhD from Yale in 1884 as a doctorate in philosophy. After Chicago, he taught at Stanford, the University of Missouri. Veblen never reached the rank of full professor. His first book is published in 1899, that was The Theory of the Leisure Class. Veblen's first and famous book was The Theory of the Leisure Class. For the first one, that was conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption is the purchase of goods or services for the specific purpose of displaying one's wealth. Veblen held that the leisure class is engaged in the predatory seizure of goods without working for them. They rather to display their work to show that the work indicates power. They use such behavior to maintain or gain higher social result. The result, consumption must be wasteful. It shows that whether you are rich or poor, everyone attempts to impress others and seek to gain advantage through conspicuous consumption. The second one is propensity to avoid useful work. The members of the leisure class must avoid useful, productive work. The motive of the leisure class is engaging in these occupations is usually not an increase of work by productive effort. These occupations are of the nature of predatory, not of productive employment. Force and fraud are present today as they were among barbarian people. The last characteristic of leisure class is conservatism. Conservatism is a political philosophy which believes that if change needs to be to society, they should be made gradually. Veblen asserts that the evolution of social structure has been process of natural selection on institution. The institution must change with changing circumstances. Next is Veblen goods and upsloping demand curve. Veblen good is a good for which people's preference for buying them increase as a direct function of their price, as greater price confers greater status. Veblen was a well-known critic of neoclassical economics. Based on his theory, some consumers buy luxury goods mainly for their conspicuous consumption. Appeal has been integrated into neoclassical analysis. The figure shows the downsloping demand curve D1, D2, and D3 are derived by allowing product price to change while assume that conspicuous consumption utility is constant along the curve. Conspicuous consumption utility for Veblen goods is not constant as price change. It falls as the price decrease and rise as the price increase. The two curves show that the consumer will buy more of the product when the price fall. Curve D3 represents that greater consumption utility than D2. The decline in price from P3 to P2 will reduce the conspicuous consumption utility and shift the demand curve leftward from D3 to D2 because of the price of expensive automobile will cut in half. A price decline in P2 to P1 further reduce the goods conspicuous consumption utility, shift the curve from D2 to D1. Note that price reduction of P3 to P2 to P1 in the figure produce net reduction in quantity demand from Q3 to Q2 to Q1. Lower price make consumer to reduce their purchase of these Veblen's goods. Although certain consumers may reduce their purchases of some luxury goods when product price falls, many others purchases enter the market to buy the good. Next, Veblen's theory of the leisure class constitutes an attack on neoclassical economics, which assume that consumers are sovereign. Through their dollar works, consumers determine the composition of commodities produced, and therefore the allocation of society's resources that will maximize welfare. If large portions of consumption are undertaken mainly to impress neighbors who purchasing similar items to maintain their relative status, then government might be able to enhance overall well-being by restricting wasteful consumption by everyone. Veblen also attacked the neoclassical directly. For example, he declared John Batts' cloud system static and therefore useless and his dynamic essentially a direct static condition. Veblen saw cloud system as based on the pre-evolutionary view of normality and natural law. That was a view that prevents awareness of cumulative change. Veblen, in effect, also accused the neoclassics of supporting the present chain of the distribution of wealth and income. He thought it's not truly a theory of anything, but merely for or theology used to justify private property and poverty income. Finally, Veblen also attacked the notion of perfect competition, which then dominated standard economics theory. He recognized that most businessmen had some monopolistic control over the price they charged and that they used advertising to strengthen their market position. Veblen believed that work is not genuinely irksome, or else the survival of the human race will be jeopardized. It is not people's proclivity for effort, but for achieving that really matters. When not harassed by our work, people have not an aversion to work. People inherently want to do work and to do it well. They deprecate wars. Allied with the equally important instinct for parenthood, the instinct for workmanship impels the current generation to improve life for posterity. We try to avoid greed and indolence. We educate and train our children. We improve technology and conserve our resources because of our instinct of workmanship. The production of goods is merely a means to profit, and when the two goods conflict, the former is sacrificed later. Their manipulation prevents prices from falling. If the economy is stable, the opportunities for profit will be increased. Next, credit and business cycle. Credit plays a special role in modern business, according to Veblen. This is because borrowing money can increase profit as long as the current rate of business earning exceeds the rate of interest. The resources to credit therefore becomes widespread and typical. The competitive earning capacity of an enterprise comes to rest on the basis of the initial capital plus such borrowed fund as the capital will support. The fact that bank credit enables firms to mobilize a supply for labor from among those who are unemployed, underemployed, or self-employed makes the drawing of labor into large industrial establishment increase the total output. Veblen's views on credit led him directly into his business cycle theory. As the dollar increased, this could serve as a collateral for the further extension of credits. Credits will expand more with the organization of monopolies, because the expected increase in the profits of monopolies and the input goodwill of the new corporations also are capitalized in the price of the securities issue. This cumulative extension of credit rests on a shaky foundation. Sooner or later, a discrepancy will arise between the money value of the collateral and the capitalized value of the property compute on expected earnings. The decline of profits and chronic depression can be remedied by an increase in the wasteful and unproductive consumptions of goods as well as the monopoly. The last part of the Veblen is the solution. Survey of technicians. First, Veblen attacked Marx's labor theory of value as being at best tautological and at worst an unproven playful mystification. He denied the socialist claim that the rich are becoming richer and the poor will becoming poorer. He said the existing system will not have made the worker poorer as measured absolutely. Next, Veblen thought that the engineers, technicians might eventually lead the social revolution and operate industry for the common good. Engineers are the best representative of the community of large because capital and labor bargaining our price have become a loose-knit vested interest that seeks its own benefit to the detriment of society. Last but not least, Veblen did not base his hope on reform the amelioration of conditions under capitalism. He hoped to see capitalism superseded entirely. Toward the end of his life, he looked quite favorably at the experiment in the Soviet Union, with its heavy emphasis on central planning.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Atir Hamirah binti Uman Zaini. My metric number is 271656. So now I'm going to continue the presentation by presenting Wesley Clare Mitchell. So before we start, let's get to know him first. So his name is Wesley Clare Mitchell. He was born at the US at 5 August 1874 and he is an American. His education is PhD at the University of Chicago, and one of the greatest contribution of him was empirical research on business cycles. And fun fact about him is he focused more on empirical studies compared to Veblen. Next, we move on to the importance of empirical investigation. There are several stated there, so we go one by one. The first one is Mitchell said, economics is a science of human behavior. Next, the future of economics is moving toward more research and less theorizing. He also said economics will develop more fruitfully in future upon quantitative side. Mitchell found the National Bureau of Economic Research called NBER. Under his supervision, NBER launched one of the first comprehensive studies of the amount and distribution of national income. NBER has also published a vast bulk of statistical analysis over the years. Lastly, most of these research are highly orthodox economics. Move on to business cycles. The study of business fluctuations was Mitchell's greatest contribution. Business cycle theory approached a tested explanation of experience instead of an exercise in logic. Mitchell's empirical work on the business cycle led to four conclusions. The first one is business fluctuations arise in money economy. Its view rises crisis and depression not as a disease of capitalism, but rather as a problem arising in the society where economic activities are carried on mainly by making and spending money. Second, business cycles are widely diffused throughout the economy. The enterprises are so independent, so business firms are bound to one another by industrial, commercial, and financial ties. so none prospers or declines without affecting others. The third one is business fluctuations depend on the prospects for profit. The prospects for profit are the glue to business fluctuations. A business enterprise can serve the community by making goods only if it makes a profit in a long run. Last but not least, fluctuations are systematically generated by the economy itself. Business cycles are part of the working of the economy itself. Michel's entire work is of the evolutionary and dynamically approach. Next, we move on to social planning. The frequent recurrence of economic crisis and depression is evidence that the automatically functioning of our business system is defective. The task then is to promote careful social planning or national planning to overcome the worst features of business fluctuations while preserving economic liberty and increasing the security. Measures reliance on national planning to ameliorate the human condition was based partly on his pragmatic psychology. The second difficulty in planning derives from the interdependence of social processes. Social planning must consider both direct and indirect effects of social actions. National planning is inevitable, said Mitchell. So I think that's all for me. I'm gonna pass the presentation to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hi and Assalamualaikum. My name is Nur Ain binti Rafi and my metric number is 271629. Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Now we proceed to the next American economist, which is John Kenneth Galbraith. John Kenneth Galbraith, also known as Ken Galbraith, was a Canadian-American economist, diplomat, public official, and intellectual. He was born on October 15, 1908, at Iona Station, Ontario, Canada. He died on April 29, 2006. He graduated from Ontario Agricultural College in 1931 and received a doctorate in agricultural economics at University of California, Berkeley. After finishing his studies, he taught successively at Harvard and Princeton universities until 1942. During World War II and the post-war period, he held a variety of government posts and served as editor of Fortune magazine from 1943 until 1948 before resuming his academic career at Harvard in 1948. He established himself as a politically active liberal academician with a talent for communicating with the reading public. A key advisor to President John F. Kennedy, Galbraith served as ambassador to India from 1961 to 1963. When he returned again to Harvard, he became Professor Emeritus in 1975. He also continued his involvement in public affairs, and in 1967-1968, he was nationally chairman of American for Democratic Action. His major writings constitute on both an attack on neoclassical economics thought and an analysis of modern capitalism. He critiqued the neoclassical, which is conventional wisdom, as a set idea that is familiar and widely accepted, but no longer relevant. According to Galbraith, his evolutionary approach explores changing conditions and examines the need to change ideas to fit any new situations. He highlighted the conventional wisdom not on those who originally expounded the ideas. There are several theories of Galbraith's that challenge orthodox economics above all his theories. Two theories of particular importance are first, the dependence effect, and the second is theories of firms' behavior. First is the dependence effect. From the neoclassical economics, they assume that consumers are sovereign. Sovereign, which means consumer will buy goods and services in the market as a response to their personal desires or demand. But Galbraith says that it is not consumers who are sovereign in modern industry system, but the gigantic firms that produce markets, goods, and services. Modern capitalism is dominated by large enterprises and characterized by an abundance of contrived ones that are the products of corporate planning and massive advertising. Independence effect, producers will decide what shall be produced, and then mold consumers will test so that they buy the products. The neoclassical theories of consumer choice take wants as given, but Galbraith asks how consumers go about formulating those wants in the first place. Also, according to him, one cannot defend production as satisfying wants if that production creates the wants. His theory of consumer demand has an important policy implications, which is there will be an under-allocation of the resource to the public good, also known as social imbalance. The creation of artificial ones shifts resources towards private goods and away from public goods that have greater inherent value. For example, new automobiles are seen as being more important than new roads. One way to remedy this imbalance, Galbraith said that would be to impose sales taxes on consumer goods and services. The objective was to increase the availability of public sector goods and services. Galbraith says that this is true for the market sector, which is owners of small firms actively manage the enterprises, but not the planning sector that is ownership and the control are separated. The disgruntled stockholders who do not like the performance of a particular firm do not have an option of firing the management, but the usual resource is to sell the shares of the company and buy shares of the other companies. The technostructure, which means a group of experts in the different areas, consists of managers, executives, designers, engineers, and fourth, not only has an incentive to maximize the return to the millions of anonymous stockholders, but it also pursues much more complex purpose, which Galbraith categorized as protective and affirmative. The major affirmative purpose of the firm is corporate growth, which is the growth of output, sales, and revenues produced, greater employment, security, and financial reward to all the members of technostructure. In the orthodox theory of the firm, oligopolies restrict their production in order to boost their prices and enhance their profit. They said that no point is better accepted by the neoclassical model than that the monopoly price is higher and the output is smaller than is socially ideal. While in Galbraith's theory, oligopolies fix prices at low levels once they achieve a minimum profit and permit expansion of total output and sales. Huge advertising outlays, campaigns, and to get market share, unprofitable mergers between competitive and non-competitive firms, and so forth, all make perfect sense if the goal is growth. According to Galbraith, the neoclassical model describes an ill that does not exist, which means high oligopolistic prices and restricted output become its assumed purpose that is not pursued the profit maximization. Galbraith's theory of the firm has several interesting policy implications. For example, traditional antitrust efforts should be abandoned. This size owes to economics of scale, large research and development budgets, and the ability to incorporate to new technology. The public, through the government, must wrest control of the planning sector of the economy from the technostructure, ensuring that it serves the public purpose and should take several forms. For example, a permanent public price and wage agency should control the price of the largest firms in the economy and ensure that wage gains in the major collective agreements bargaining agreements do not exceed the growth of national productivity. This planning authority will also have to coordinate economic plans with other industrial nations. In this case, Galbraith called for government to redistribution of income through public control of executive salaries, progressive taxation, an increase in the minimum wage and a negative income tax plan. Firms in the market sector should be encouraged to merge so that they can compete more effectively with the firm in the planning sector. Galbraith saw the need for a greatly expanded role for government in the modern economy. That's all for the Galbraith theories. Thank you.
As conclusion, Institutionalist School of Economic Thought was begun around 1900 and introduced by Thorstein Veblen, is an American contribution to economic thought. Generally, institutional schools disagree with laissez-faire system, deductive, and microeconomics that used by classical, marginalist, and neoclassical school of economic thought. Besides that, they more emphasis more on the role of institutions in economic life as a mind economy as a whole by using evolutionary and inductive method and suggested the government intervention in the economy. This school was friendly towards the German school of economic thought and its methodology. Basically, there are three reasons why government should intervene in the economy. The first one is to overcome clash of interest between groups. The second one, to overcome the inefficiency in markets and maladjustment in economy. The last one is to implement liberal democratic reform in order to bring more fairness in distribution of wealth and income. That's all from me. Thank you.